Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Titan English. My name is Michael, and I'm very happy to have you here with me today. Before we begin, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you enjoy learning English through stories. Thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot to us, and it helps our channel continue to grow. And now, let's begin today's mystery story. It was a cold Friday evening in Chicago. Rain fell steadily across the city, and the lights of the streets reflected on the wet pavement. Inside Union Station, people hurried past one another with umbrellas, bags, and tired faces. Some were going home from work. Some were running to catch trains. Most of them were too busy to notice anything unusual.
Ethan Cole sat alone on a bench near Platform 9. He held a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a small notebook in the other. He was 32 years old and worked as a freelance journalist. He usually wrote travel stories and simple human interest articles for local magazines. His life was quiet, ordinary, and mostly predictable. He liked it that way. That evening, he was waiting for the 7:40 train. He had spent the afternoon interviewing the owner of a small bakery in downtown Chicago. The article was called Hidden Cafes of the City. It wasn't an exciting story, but it paid the bills. Ethan took a sip of coffee and looked up. That was when he saw her. A woman stood near the edge of Platform 9. She wore a dark green coat, and her hair was damp from the rain. She looked elegant, calm, and strangely different from everyone else in the station. Then Ethan noticed something even stranger. She was looking directly at him. Not at the crowd, not at her phone, not through him. At him. Ethan frowned slightly. He was sure he had never seen her before. But a moment later, she began walking toward him. "Daniel," she said softly as she stopped in front of him. Ethan looked up in confusion. "Sorry?" For a second, surprise crossed her face, but then she smiled. "You really don't recognize me?" "I think you have the wrong person," Ethan said. The woman sat down beside him at once. She leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Please don't say my name here." Ethan stared at her. "I don't know your name." Her eyes shifted across the station. Ethan followed her gaze and saw a tall man in a gray coat standing near a magazine stand. He wasn't reading. He was watching them. When Ethan looked back, the woman had gone pale. "Listen carefully," she whispered. "In 1 minute, stand up, walk to the big clock near the cafe, and leave through the west exit. Don't look back." Ethan blinked. "What are you talking about?" "You're in danger if you stay near me," she said. He almost laughed. "That makes no sense. I don't even know you." "Yes," she said quietly. "That's what makes this so unfair." Then she slipped something cold into his hand. It was a small silver key with a tiny white tag attached to it. The number on the tag was 314.
She stood up immediately. "If anyone asks," she said, "tell them you never met Elena Hart." Then she disappeared into the crowd.
Ethan sat still for several seconds. The key felt strangely heavy in his hand. His coffee suddenly tasted bitter. He looked around the station again, trying to find her. She was gone. Then he remembered the man in the gray coat. The man was no longer near the magazine stand. Ethan stood up quickly. For a moment, he thought about throwing the key away and getting on his train. This was ridiculous. He was not a detective. He was not part of some secret drama. He was just a tired journalist with rent to pay and an unfinished article about pastries. But something about Elena's face stopped him. Her fear had looked real. He began walking toward the clock near the cafe. As he moved through the station, he felt an unpleasant pressure on the back of his neck. It was the feeling of being watched. Then he heard footsteps behind him. They were not close. They were not fast, but they were steady. Ethan glanced back and saw the gray-coated man walking in the same direction. At the clock, Ethan suddenly changed course and headed toward the west exit. The man changed direction too. That was enough. Ethan pushed through the station doors and stepped into the cold Chicago night. Rain struck his face, and car lights shone through the wet streets. He looked for a taxi, but there was none. Behind him, the station doors opened. The gray-coated man stepped outside. Ethan began walking faster. Then he crossed the street without waiting for the light. A horn blasted behind him, and someone shouted, but he didn't stop. Rain ran down his neck as he turned into a narrow side street. The alley was lined with closed stores, trash bins, and weak yellow lights. His shoes splashed through shallow puddles. He looked back. The gray-coated man was still following him. "Hey!" the man shouted. Ethan ran. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he wanted distance from the station, from Elena Hart, from the silver key, and from the man behind him. At the end of the alley, he saw an old hotel with a glowing sign above the door. The Franklin House Hotel. Without thinking, Ethan rushed inside. The lobby was warm, quiet, and old-fashioned. A receptionist looked up in surprise as Ethan entered, wet and breathless. "Can I help you?" Ethan turned and looked through the glass doors. The gray-coated man walked past the entrance without stopping. Ethan let out a slow breath. "Yes," he said, trying to sound calm. "Do you have a room available?" The receptionist nodded. "One single room left."
Ethan almost said no. He didn't need a room. Then he looked at the key in his hand.
"Can I ask something strange?" he said. The receptionist narrowed her eyes. "That depends." Ethan placed his press card on the desk. "I'm a journalist, and I think a woman may be in danger. Do you have a room 314 in this hotel?" The receptionist hesitated. "Yes," she said slowly, "but nobody is staying there tonight." Ethan held up the key. 10 minutes later, after a suspicious look and a phone call to the manager, Ethan stood outside room 314 with the receptionist beside him. He placed the key in the lock. It fit perfectly. The door opened. The room was dark, silent, and empty. The bed was neatly made. The curtains were closed. There was no suitcase, no clothing, and no sign that anyone had stayed there. But on the desk by the window, there was a brown envelope. On the front, written in neat black ink, were the words, "For Daniel only." The receptionist looked at him. "Daniel?" "No," Ethan said, but he opened the envelope anyway. Inside was a photograph and a folded note. The photograph showed Elena standing beside an older man in a wheelchair outside a large gated house. On the back were the words, "Elena and Father, Lake Forest, 2022. Ethan unfolded the note carefully. The message was short, but every line felt urgent. If you are reading this, then something has gone wrong. Do not trust Adrian Vale. He lies beautifully. Locker 27. Find the red file before he does. And whatever happens, do not let him know who Daniel Reed really is." Ethan read it twice. The names meant nothing to him. But before he could think further, a scream came from outside the building. He and the receptionist rushed downstairs and out the side entrance. A man lay on the wet pavement under the metal fire escape. Gray coat, white hair. It was the same man from the station. His eyes were open, but he looked barely conscious. Ethan knelt beside him. The man's lips moved weakly. Ethan leaned closer. "Not Daniel," the man whispered. Then he lost consciousness. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes. Ethan gave a statement, but he said nothing about the key, the note, or Elena Hart. Something told him that revealing everything too early would be a mistake. By the time he got home, he was soaked, exhausted, and restless. He placed the photo and note on the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and began searching. Elena Hart was easy to find. She was the daughter of Richard Hart, a wealthy real estate developer from the Chicago suburbs. Since her father had suffered a stroke 2 years earlier, she had rarely appeared in public.
Adrian Vale was also easy to find. His face appeared in charity event photos, business pages, and social websites. He looked polished, educated, and trustworthy. But the deeper Ethan searched, the stranger things became. Adrian seemed to appear again and again near wealthy women, private deals, and sudden financial losses. Then Ethan found something else. Over the past several years, 3 wealthy women had reportedly lost large amounts of money to fiancés or business partners who later disappeared. One name appeared more than once: Adrian Vale. It was not proof, but it was enough to frighten him. Then his phone rang. The number was unknown. "Hello?" Ethan said. A calm male voice answered, "You should have taken your train." The line went dead. The next morning, Ethan went to locker 27 at the station. It stood near a vending machine in a quiet corner. He looked around carefully before using the silver key. The locker opened.
Inside was a red file and a cheap burner phone.
Ethan took both and left the station quickly. He crossed the street into a small cafe, sat in the back, and opened the file. Inside were copied passports, fake business cards, printed emails, bank records, and photos. A pattern appeared almost immediately. Adrian Vale had used different names to enter the lives of wealthy women. Sometimes he said he was an investor. Sometimes he claimed to be a producer. Sometimes he acted like a man deeply in love. But each version of him wanted the same thing: gain trust, reach the money, disappear before the truth came out. Then Ethan found an email from Elena. "I know you are lying to me. If you come near my father again, I will go to the police. I also know what happened to Sophie. Don't call me. Don't follow me." Below the email, someone had written in blue ink, "She found out too early." Ethan's stomach tightened. A few pages later, he found a photocopied newspaper article. The headline read, "Young woman dies in apparent suicide." Her name was Sophie Vickers. Her father's name was Malcolm Vickers. Ethan sat back slowly. He thought about the man in the gray coat, the white hair, the whisper in the alley. Sophie's father had been following this case too. Then the burner phone vibrated. One message appeared on the screen. "If you want to save her, come alone. Navy Pier, 6 p.m. At 5:50 p.m., Ethan stood near the far end of Navy Pier with cold wind blowing in from Lake Michigan. The sky was gray and the water below looked dark and restless. He had hidden the red file under his coat. An hour earlier,
He had called the police anonymously and warned them about possible violence at the pier. At exactly 6 o'clock, a black car pulled up near the entrance. One man stepped out with a dark umbrella in his hand.
It was Adrian Vale.
Even from a distance, Ethan understood why people trusted him. Adrian looked calm, polished, and completely in control. He walked toward Ethan with slow, steady steps. Mr. Cole, or should I say, Daniel? Ethan is fine, Ethan replied.
Adrian smiled faintly. So, Elena made contact with you.
You know she did, Ethan said. Where is she? Safe, if you cooperate, Adrian replied. Ethan didn't move. I don't believe you. No, Adrian said softly. I didn't think you would.
He nodded toward Ethan's coat. That file belongs to me.
It belongs to the women you lied to, Ethan answered. For the first time, Adrian's expression changed slightly. You don't understand what you're involved in, he said.
Then explain.
Adrian looked out at the dark water. Richard Hart has money, lawyers, investigators, and influence. Elena found out too much. She thought she could accuse me and walk away.
So this is about protecting yourself? Ethan asked.
This, Adrian said, is about survival.
And Sophie Vickers?
Adrian was silent for only a second. Then he answered, Sophie was fragile. Ethan had never heard a colder sentence in his life, not because it was loud, but because it carried no regret at all. At that moment, he saw movement near the black car. A woman stepped out. Elena.
Her face was pale, and her coat was wrinkled as if someone had grabbed her. Adrian smiled again. You see, she's perfectly fine.
Elena looked at Ethan and gave the smallest shake of her head. No.
Something was wrong. Then another voice cut through the wind. Get away from her!
Malcolm Vickers stepped out from behind a row of metal storage boxes. He held a gun in both hands. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. Adrian turned sharply. For the first time, real fear crossed his face.
Mr. Vickers, Adrian said, this is a mistake.
No, Vickers said. The mistake was years ago, when my daughter trusted you.
Elena gasped. Please put the gun down. But nobody listened.
Adrian suddenly grabbed Elena and pulled her in front of him. Elena cried out. Ethan rushed forward. The gun fired. The sound cracked across the pier. Elena fell to the ground. Adrian released her and turned to run, but Ethan threw himself at him.
Both men crashed onto the wet boards, and the red file flew open as papers scattered into the wind.
Adrian punched Ethan across the face, but Ethan held on. He refused to let go.
A moment later, police sirens screamed from the road. Officers rushed onto the pier.
"Don't move," one of them shouted. Adrian froze. Vickers dropped the gun. Ethan pulled himself away and crawled toward Elena. She was alive. The bullet had gone through her shoulder.
She looked up at him, pale and trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I chose you because you looked kind." 3 days later, Ethan sat in a hospital waiting room with a bandage above his eye. Elena was expected to recover. Adrian Vale had been charged with fraud, deception, intimidation, and several financial crimes. Older cases were now being reopened. Malcolm Vickers was alive too. His grief was real, but his revenge had nearly killed another innocent person.
When Elena finally agreed to speak with Ethan, she looked nothing like the mysterious woman from Platform 9. She looked tired, frightened, and honest.
"I saw Vickers at the station," she said quietly. "I recognized him from an old photo. He had been following Adrian for months."
Ethan nodded. "And Daniel Reed?"
"That was one of Adrian's names," Elena said. "Sophie knew him as Daniel Reed."
Ethan let out a slow breath. "So you used that name with me on purpose." Elena lowered her eyes. "I needed to create confusion. I needed someone outside all of this."
"You could have gotten me killed," Ethan said.
"I know," she replied, "and I'm sorry."
He looked at her for a long moment. "Why me?" Elena gave a tired smile. "Because everyone else in the station was looking at screens. You were looking at people."
2 weeks later, Ethan's article appeared in a Sunday magazine. He did not write a cheap scandal story. Instead, he titled it "The Masks We Trust."
He never called Elena foolish. He never called Sophie weak. And he never described Adrian as simply handsome or intelligent.
He described something far more dangerous. A man who could become whatever people wanted to see. A gentleman, a lover, a rescuer, a dream.
At the end of the article, Ethan wrote, "Some people do not force doors open. They smile, and the door opens for them. They do not steal at the beginning.
First, they make you trust them.
And sometimes the greatest danger is not a stranger in the dark.
It is a charming face standing in the light."
A month later, Ethan returned to Union Station on another rainy evening. He stood again near Platform 9 with a paper cup of coffee in his hand.
Then someone sat beside him. It was Elena. This time, she gave him a small, honest smile. Hello, Ethan. He smiled back. No fake names tonight? She shook her head. No, I'm done with those. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of the station. Then Ethan asked, "Why did you really choose me that night?" Elena watched the crowd move past. "Because you noticed people," she said, "and sometimes that is what saves lives." A train pulled into the station, and its doors opened with a soft mechanical sound. Neither of them stood up. Above them, rain tapped gently against the glass roof. Around them, people hurried past without noticing anything. But Ethan knew something now that he had not known before. Mysteries do not always begin with police tape or headlines. Sometimes they begin with a wrong name, spoken at exactly the right moment. Sometimes with a key. Sometimes with one whispered sentence in a crowded station. Don't say my name. Thank you so much for listening to this mystery story on Titan English. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to support our channel. Thank you again for your support, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!
Bài học đến đây đã kết thúc rồi. Đừng quên luyện tập bài học hàng ngày để kỹ năng tiếng Anh của bạn ngày một tiến bộ nhé. Chúng tôi hy vọng bạn thấy bài học hữu ích. Chúc các bạn học vui và một ngày tốt lành.